say that, and then somebody complains about something. For what? Why? I think it's a great idea. Who's gonna? Well, if we're all gonna approve it anyway, why we have to talk about it? I mean, in general. It'd be crazy if we couldn't wait 2 weeks.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order. Notice of an open work session for the city of North Kansas City, August 6, 2019. Eric?
Thanks, sir. We do have two topics for tonight's work session. The first being an update from the owner of Jim's Disposal Service, Chuck Bird, just regarding issues right now involved in providing trash and recycling services, and particularly trash and recycling services in North Kansas City. So I would call on Mr. Bird now to talk to the council, take any questions, have some discussion with you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Chuck Bird, Jim's Disposal Service. It's a pleasure to be before you once again in regards to trash service and recycling. I first want to address, my brother is here with me this evening too. He's right here, okay. Anyway, he's going to be coming up and talking a little bit about recycling. But first of all, I wanted to address, I know media has been having Jim's Disposal as a topic of discussion in regards to service in the Northland. There is some underlying issues there that is out of our control because we are actually the subcontractor on the contract with Kansas City. We're not the prime contractor, and so there are some other things that I care not to really go into. We've had some discussion, Eric and I, and the city attorney have talked about those issues, and I can assure North Kansas City that there will be no service issues when it comes to providing the service here in North Kansas City moving forward throughout the duration of our contract. And so I wanted to address that. But on to the recycling issue, which I'm really here for this evening to talk a little bit about that. The recycling as we know it has really taken a turn. I'm quite sure you've probably heard in the media or in the news that China is no longer taking recycling from the U.S. And that has been in place for probably now going on 2.5 years. And the reason for that is because of the contamination that is associated with what we're sending to China. And so there again, there is some politics that goes along with that, and I don't really care to get into that. When we stop buying steel, they stop buying recycling. And so that had a lot to do with it. But be it as it may, when you start looking at, as we know, recycling right now, the biggest part is we're really not recycling the right way. And even when we go and look at these websites that Mid-American Regional Council may have, or even Kansas City, when you start looking at the items that are on there, here's one that stands out right here. Shredded paper in plastic bags. Plastic bags are the #1 culprit that shuts down processing centers. Those ones we get from Walmart and all the other stores, they are like kryptonite. And what happens is when you take the product and you tip it on the floor at a processing center, that plastic gets wrapped up into the conveyors and it shuts the systems down. We did take some of the recycling from North Kansas City and we had it evaluated. And what we saw in there was mind-boggling. Because see, when we pick it up at the curb, we basically tip the cart into the back of the truck and we take the truck and we take it to the processor. We don't see it after that, but the processor does see it and they see what's actually in that cart. And what we're seeing in there, the contamination level, it was above 20%. And that's not acceptable. They continue to take it to the point where they said, well, it's so contaminated that we're going to start charging to take it. And that number is somewhere around $60 for 20% contamination. Anything above 20%, it goes to $150 per ton. And so when I looked at what was coming out of North Kansas City, not just North Kansas City, it's other municipalities too. What's really saving Kansas City, and I won't say really saving them, is Kansas City has the recycling bins. We get a chance to police that before we actually put it in the back of the truck, because we can see what's there. And if it is contaminated, or if it's a product that we know is not acceptable, we can reject it at that point. And so we do a lot of policing up front versus it actually being in a cart and we're tipping it. We don't get a chance to see what's there. And trust me, we see some of everything from deer carcasses to car parts and you name it. But I will tell you that the way that we know recycling and have been knowing recycling, those days are behind us now. My brother actually went to Waste Expo earlier this year for the sole purpose to get a better understanding about recycling. And so the powers to be were there. We had some larger municipalities that has been affected by the recycling for quite some time. I'm going to ask him to come up and talk a little bit about that because I didn't go, he was there, and let him give you a little feedback of what we know as recycling and what the perception of recycling should be moving forward. This is Kevin Bird.
Thank you, Chuck. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Again, as Chuck mentioned, I went to the Waste Expo back in May to my focus was actually on the state of recycling because it was really at an all-time high as far as and the number of people at that workshop was outside the door. So it was not only my interest, but it was the interest of most people that were there. And what we found is that there was someone there from Washington, D.C. who represented the government to talk about their what they viewed the state of recycling to look like going forward. And there was also someone there from China to talk about why they decided to do what they did. And he didn't really get into the politics, but he said what he did realize is that he was receiving some recycling up to 20% contaminated product. And then they moved it from that down to 5%, and then it's now moved to 0.5%. So you can imagine trying to reach that level of purity to bring a product in to renew it, to bring it back to some form of a renewable product. So there's not a MRF that I know of in this state, in the United States, that can get a product to a 0.5 state. If you were doing virgin product like cardboard, things like that, yes, you can get it there. And what China did was invested in a lot of high-tech equipment to verify these containers they were receiving were actually good. So they would x-ray them because what was going on was someone was cleaning the front of the bales. So the bales are shipped in 2,000-pound bales. So what they were doing was cleaning the front to make it appear that was pure product. They got smart and wise, and they decided we'll start x-raying it to find out what's in the middle. And then they started rejecting it. And then they got even smarter and said, we'll just open the container now, and if we can smell it, we just close the container doors and send it back. So it's even gotten more complicated. But it's not a dead issue. It's just an education of what recyclable products are really recyclable. We make that assumption that we know, and we do that unconsciously. We just throw it in a bin, and we say, well, yeah, we're recycling, we're good stewards. Things like magazines, like a magazine with slick ink on it, right? You'll pick up a whole bin of those, and that's all contaminated product. It can't be recycled, right? But we don't know that because as we were taught, recycling is anything that's not what? Garbage, right? But we don't realize we're actually making the problem worse. So it's really gotten complicated, but I don't think it's a dead issue. I think it's just about re-educating people and getting down to what 4 simple things need to be considered. It has to have no ink on it. And it can be glass if you want to recycle glass. It can be glass. It can be cardboard, or it could be any kind of paper. Just take, for instance, a plastic water bottle, right? The bottle itself can be recycled, but the cap can't be. How many times do you see the cap not with the bottle, right? Put everything in there. And the thing I asked the lady from Washington, if you want to help us to get a better understanding, what you could do is just standardize the color of the bin that recyclables go in from a global perspective. Just give us one color, because when people visit neighborhoods, people visit my house, if their recycle bin is blue and mine is green, they will throw garbage in my recycle bin unconsciously without thinking, because they know theirs is blue, so I don't see a blue one, so it must be this one. Let's throw the trash in there. And then we have all these problems that compound on top of that. And as Chuck stated, the receivers of this product are now getting more and more strict on us as far as what they will accept and won't accept. And it gets to a point where even $150 per ton will go away. They won't even accept it at a certain point because it's not to their best interest to even try to sort it. Does that make sense? So this is the long and short of it. Recycling is not dead. It can be readdressed, but it's going to take a huge campaign. It's going to take a lot of education and a lot of forethought. And it kind of starts out, I believe, at the school level, at the grade school level. So if we can start teaching the kids how to do it correctly, it usually spreads up from there, right? Because as adults, we kind of have our own ideas and we just do what we do. But it's not a dead issue. It may not happen in the next 4 or 5 years, but it's going to take some time for it to come back and to become a renewable product, a viable product. We don't have a lot of resources in this country that can even process it. You know, we can sort it, we can bale it, but then we have to ship it out of our country in order for it to be renewable. So we've got to really focus on how do we get that here in our own country, where we're not having to ship it across the pond to get it rejected and sent back to us. So if, long and short, I hope this explains to you kind of what the state of recycling is, where it's come from and where it's gotten to now, and what we need to do in the future to fix it. As Chuck said, once we tip it in the truck, we can't identify what's in the makeup of it, right? So that's in long and short my story. Anybody got any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
A quick question. You said glass is recycled. Are you guys taking glass right now?
No, glass is a renewable product.
Right, but you're
it's-
not.
No, and
Okay.
nobody really does take glass. I'm just telling you that's a commodity that you can actually put in the bucket as a recyclable product if it had a viable end. I mean, it's so complicated. Glass is, they say it depends on the color of the glass,
Right.
determines if it's contaminated or not, or compatible or not. So a huge problem there. And one of the things that the lady from DC talked about was maybe how to take the approach of making certain vendors use only recyclable goods. I say, well, good luck. You know, it's a free enterprise, so I doubt if that ever works. But if you just standardize the color of the bucket, to me, helps us to get started, right? Because then I can educate people on what to put in the bucket. If it's no matter where they go, it's the same color bucket, right? No matter if it's this big or this big, the color defines what it is, and we can start educating from that point, and I believe we can actually make some headway.
Of course, as I'm sure you all know, Ripple Glass does operate a drop-off glass recycling center. I'm not sure how they do it or what the economics of it is, but they are still doing that now, and there is one located at the overflow parking lot of the YMCA.
Yeah, and sometimes what they use it for is paving.
Right.
You know, you see that nice sparkly stuff sometimes in the asphalt. Well, sometimes it winds up as that type of commodity. So it is renewable. It's just not in a form that we used to seeing it come back in. Yes.
This bottle, is that all recyclable in with the paper?
No, the paper has ink on it, so no. The cap and the paper, no. The bottle,
This isn't recyclable.
not in the current state. If you rip the paper off and the cap off, yes.
What about it? Newspapers? They have ink on them.
Those ad slicks in there, now the printed ink, you can recycle. But the slick stuff, you know, the ads that they usually put a lot of gloss into, that's all contaminated.
We used to believe that on the bottom of a plastic jug, there was numbers.
Right.
And we used to think that anything up to a 7 was recyclable. But now you say it's up to 2. Is that right, or?
That's correct.
Yes.
And so if you look at your egg cartons, the styrofoam ones, it'll have the recycling logo on it. Styrofoam is not recyclable. And so, as we know recycling right now, that's changing. The dynamics are changing. Because like the bottles that we see and we send over to China, they're having to pull it out. We don't pull it out, so we send it over there, and then they have to go and separate it and pull it out. And what they're saying is, they don't want any more. And so, to bring it closer to home, and how does this affect North Kansas City? Well, we've been able to kind of not come to North Kansas City. It's not a lot of recycling, but it's enough for us to address it and say, hey, we've been able to take it. We only have now, we had 3 processing centers at the beginning of the year. We're down to 2 now. You have one in South Kansas City, and you have another one over in Overland Park. There was another one in Grandview. It's actually not taking any single stream, commingled or recycling anymore because they just couldn't afford to process it. They charged us for it. We just didn't pass it on to North Kansas City. We've been absorbing the cost. So you have municipalities like Kansas City that went from receiving $1 million+ a year off of the rebate program to now they're paying to get recycling picked up. Not just paying for the service, but they're actually paying to process it. And so that's just how serious it is. And so Eric and I, we had a meeting, and we talked about this a while back, but now it's starting to, the recycling facilities are looking exactly where this recycling is coming from, and they want to be paid for it. And so I wanted to come and have the discussion, open discussion with you guys in regards to what does that look like moving forward. So it's going to have to be a decision, how bad do you want your recycling program? Here's the cost if we move forward per ton, and it has to meet these guidelines. And so that's going to be the position that we're going to be presenting to the city. And so the city has to make a decision on what they want to do moving forward. And so I'm open for discussion about it.
Just so I understand, Chuck, when you do that, you'll do that in writing?
Yes.
So
we will.
that's, you're giving us a forewarning tonight?
Yes,
That's
this,
not-
tonight,
not an official
I'm
vote.
coming and saying, we have an issue that we're gonna have to talk about moving forward. It's not gonna be something that I'm just gonna implement without having some in-depth discussion with the council, with the mayor and the city administrators. We're gonna talk through this, and what does it look like? When will it recover? I wish I had the answer, I don't.
And again, I'm sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversation, but if, as I understand the decision that might be facing the city in the future, you might continue to pick up, but not take it to a recycling center. It would all go to, all the material would go to a landfill if we were not willing to increase the amount that we're paying you for recycling. Is that essentially the choice that'll be put to the city at some point?
That's what's gonna be put to the city. I will tell you this, it's cheaper to take it to the landfill than it is to pay to have it processed. And so your tipping fee right now for solid waste, you're somewhere around $46 a ton. Recycling at the opening is $60. Now, once we tip it, what do they do with it? I can't tell you. You know, more than likely, it's probably ending up in the landfill. But I can't tell you that that's what they're doing with it.
Well, first of all, a comment and then a couple of quick questions. Appreciate we've, for the most part, had really good service with Jim as far as the trash pickup and the recycling. You know, compared to the complaints that I got before and now after, it's been really well. As far as the recycling, first of all, some of this stuff, like I didn't even know, like the bottle, like we were talking about with the cap, I didn't know it was not recyclable. So it's something, like you said, as far as education and whether we put that in our information that we send to our residents in the Northtown Connection or some other specific separate letter if we want to continue the recycling. But the other question Eric already asked is, you know, what going forward, what are the options for the city? And so.
Well, in regards to, and we appreciate the comment on the service, and we've made some changes internally when it comes to service. So the service that you've been getting with Kevin coming on and being general manager, he's got some fresh ideas to be more efficient in what we do and how we do it moving forward. So in regards to what that looks like for the city, you know, I'm quite sure Eric and I are going to be having some meetings moving forward to see exactly what's the best way to do this, because we have two carts, one for trash and one for recycling. And if the city elects to say we're going to, and I don't want to say do away with recycling, but if we choose to suspend our recycling program and do the education, because right now Mark is not saying recycle more, they're saying recycle better. Recycle better. And Kevin touched on it. We as adults, we have the problem. If we can educate the kids and have the kids adopt what we know as the new recycling program and start there, I think that would be our first step. But it's just some basic conversation. I just wanted to come. It's not a good topic. I've had this topic of discussion with other municipalities. And so, but we're gonna have to do something. If not, everything's just gonna end up going to the landfill.
And then staff, for our question as far as our contract, when do we renew that? It's every year, but
We are in the second year of a 5-year contract, and then after that, we can renew for 5 single years if we choose to.
very good.
Do you have some questions?
It seems to me, there's no way in the world I'm going to get at least the residents in my area to change their ways in a few months, 6 months, a year. It's taken us almost 15 years to get to this point, to get them to recycle what they're doing now.
Right.
And listening to what Short you've said here, it's going to change quickly. And I hate to say it, I love to recycle. I can't see us saying that you're going to have to take the tops off these, you're going to peel the plastic. It can't take this, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. I can't see it happening quickly. It's going to take probably decades for it to get to that point, to drill it into everybody's mind that this is what it's going to take. You said another problem was the trash cans. Well, we can up our trash cans and go to little totes if that will help you. I don't think it will, because I still think you're going to have the stigma of everybody's still going to do it the way that they're going to do it. I can't see me passing on money to the constituents because they don't know how to recycle properly to the tune of whatever you decide to start charging the city. I mean, it looks like what you're giving us now, the only option I have is me personally, is to quit the recycling aspect and just concentrate on the trash.
Well, there again, we're just a service provider.
I understand.
I mean, we pick it up.
I understand, but I mean, that's what you're giving it to
Right.
me, that unless things change, you're gonna have to start charging even more. Just
mean,
not me, but the city.
What I'm saying is, based on the market,
I-
the market.
But you just said, we're tainted up to 25%, just not us, but everybody else.
Right.
It costs more money to do that. You're gonna have to pass the cost on, and that's coming back to us.
Exactly. Which I wish I had another answer for
No,
you.
and I understand that, but
Right.
like I said, I'm only one of eight, but it sounds like to me that the only choice I have is to quit recycling, which is terrible.
I agree.
That's all I have.
I feel like we can do a lot better job educating.
Right.
I don't think we spend a lot of time educating. So I mean, there will be people like Councilmember Farr says who aren't going to change or who aren't going to get the message or whatever. But I feel like as a community, we can do a lot better job educating. I get those questions all the time about how to recycle and what to recycle. So I think that if we can do that, I think we can focus a little bit. And I don't think it'll take, I think the children will learn, but I think adults can learn too, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I think if we can focus on that, then we can reevaluate where we are. I think there are other options, that we can talk about.
Right.
Like you were saying, the education piece. Recycle is supposed to be the third one. It's reduce, reuse, and then recycle if you can't do the first two. But beyond that, go back to contract. So what's the timeline on this? Do we need to have this conversation now or before the contract's up in 3 years?
Well, I think the sooner we have the discussion on what North Kansas City wants to do moving forward, we're open. I mean, that's the reason why we've had the discussion, and we've put it off as long as we could. And it's not like it's getting any better.
Yeah.
You have one processing center already closed up. The other ones are saying that we'll take it, but here's the cost. And so we don't have a choice. If you decide to continue to recycling and they're charging us, then we have to pass it on.
Is part of our contract, do we not have a fixed fee that we're paying for service?
So we do, but we have a fixed fee that covers both trash and recycling. The contract says that they shall be collected. Doesn't say where they'll go.
Yeah.
So right now, I mean, I think that, at some point, Mr. Byrd is indicating that they would come to us and they would say, you can either pay us more and we'll continue to take your recycling to a recycling center, but they're charging us more and we need to charge more. So they'd have to up our single solitary fee. Or, please understand, we're taking all of that solid waste to a landfill. I know that some communities don't want to hear that, and so they make a different choice. So if I'm hearing correctly, that's sort of where we are, but that's how we do it right now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
a
That's
single
what-
fee.
That's what I was just trying to get, kind of what our position is and.
Yeah,
what we are here.
a single amount per household.
And by no means would I ever want to send the perception that I'm picking up recycling and taking it, having it processed, and it's going to the landfill. That's the reason why I want to have open discussion and see how we can work through this.
Thank you.
And I have a question. Do we know, tonnage-wise, how much we, send to our bins, if you will, in
Yes,
North
we
Kansas
do.
City at this
Yes,
point?
we do. We send that tonnage report into the city every month.
And what is that approximately?
Wow.
Okay, well,
I have a number of months here.
I'm just curious if we're talking about
It's actually varied, and I
raising-
was talking to Mr. Byrd about this before the meeting, because I'd like to understand it a little bit better. But for the last month, June, 35.73 tons of trash and 15.75 tons of recycling.
What time period did you say that was for?
That was for the June of
Oh, just 1 month.
2019.
Okay.
That was just for 1
Okay.
month, yes. I have figures going back about 13 months in front of me.
Well, I think it's important when we're considering, balancing the cost with
Right.
our environment, if you will. So it's important to know that. And I really appreciate that you're being very transparent, because I think you've educated all of us tonight just with our water bottles in front of us. So thank you for that. We're going to have to talk about it.
I think too, part of that discussion is looking at the tons, what's the financial impact that it would have to the city? And so coming back with some good numbers, tonight is just basically saying, hey, we have an issue that we need to have some discussion about. This is one of the first ones that we've had with the council and the mayor. Eric and I have talked about this on a couple of different occasions. And so as things progress, I started to increase my dialogue with the city.
Thank you.
Yeah, you talked about education, and I think the type of people that call and ask any of us, like Valerie said, call, wants to know, but you're going to have a terrible time educating the people that don't ask in this city. I get calls on other stuff, and they said, why don't you, how come you're doing the street stuff? I said, well, we had a dozen meetings about it. Why didn't you come? Well, we didn't know about it. And they're going to say the same thing, or we'll send letters out for the trash, recycle. Half the people probably didn't read it. A fourth or more, don't care one way or the other. So you're going to have a terrible time. I bet you get bunches of them cheap plastic bags.
Yeah.
And
I just want to be clear about this. All I ever put in the recycle bin actually is paper, shredded paper, but it's not in a bag, it's just in that bin. And that newspaper and some cardboard boxes. That's it. Is that acceptable?
Yes, that product that you just discussed is acceptable. The shredded paper is good. The cardboard.
Yeah, that slick, so the slick paper on that newspaper that comes out, it came out today. I guess that would not be acceptable.
Printed newspaper,
Printed newspaper.
Grocery
that's
ads.
acceptable. The slick ads, like your magazines that have slick finish on it, that's what's contaminated.
I was going to ask, if it would help. I could reach out to some people in, small communities like North Kansas City and find out, because there was a lady there from Pennsylvania that had attacked this same problem, right? It was really crazy in her neighborhood, and she basically moved the needle from a 41% contaminated rate down to a 9%, just through some educational programs. And I can ask her to send me what those programs were. I know she did do billboards. I know they did a couple of billboards in the city. And I don't know what the cost was, but I could ask her that as well. But it started with that, and she basically broke it down to 4 basic food groups, if you want to call them that, right? She said glass, cardboard, and plastic, but she made sure the cap was off the bottle, right? So that's kind of what her first attempt was, is to try to get them down to thinking about just 4 basic things, and then start to move from there. Because like you said, it's not going to happen overnight, but I don't believe that we're here to actually put more pain on the city either. And I like the fact that if we even just move to a bin, as you described, gives us at least a better opportunity to police it. Yeah, you may not ever, you may write more violations the first month than you ever thought you'd write, by just rejecting it. But it would send a very easy message that they could understand without feeling like, someone's coming down to say, stop this altogether. I think it starts, like I said, this discussion tonight is just a starting point. But there's a lot of things we could probably do together to help get there, right? And that's what my role is. Go ahead.
So a big thanks for coming out and talking about that and being transparent. While I've got the GM here, I've got some people in my neighborhood asking me, hey, while they're here, ask about it. For service-wise, the garbage bins, when they get picked up, it looks like the guys are reaching in and pulling the bags out rather than tipping the bin up. And so I've had a lot of complaints that, there's still stuff in the bottom, pizza box or, a McDonald's bag or something like that aren't getting picked up. So it kind of accumulates in the bottom of the bag. The other thing, in the neighborhood here on the north end of town, there's been a couple missed pickups. It's not constant or anything, but the HOA has been cracking down on leaving bins out. So I know that the contract says within 24 hours you have to come back and pick up if it's missed. But we could get fined for having our bins out for the next 24 hours. So just something to put a bug in your ear about those 2 issues.
How do we get notified of the misses? How does that communicate to us?
If we're notified, then we in turn notify your office, and as I indicated to you, Councilmember, I mean, we could try to have a conversation with the HOA, but it's really unreasonable for them
Extremely.
to fine anybody for a full bin that hasn't been picked up yet. I can understand if you're leaving empty bins out, how they might not want you to do that. We don't really want people to do that either.
Right.
But to fine people when it simply hasn't been picked up yet seems
Yeah, it's non-trash
irrational,
days,
yeah.
keep it in the garage situation. And there haven't been fines levied yet, but the threat has been put out on e-neighbors a number of times. And it's just something I wouldn't want to have the 2 worlds collide and have, fines levied when the bins are still full.
I will address the first issue.
Yes.
I will address that first issue. I'm just saying that. I'll make sure I do that. And
Much
then
appreciated.
If we can maybe get our miss list more in front of me. So I'll look and find out who's on my team responsible for that. And I'll make a commitment that we'll respond and pick that miss up within 24 hours.
We also want to make sure that the bins too, when they're picked up and tipped, and then they're left back, they're not left in the middle of the sidewalk, over but close to the yard or in the driveway or what have you. Not driveway, but sidewalk area entrance.
Sure. Should be put back where they were located before.
I just wanted to echo his comments as well about we always have stuff left in the bottom.
Okay.
And it just, every pickup, and that was the one note my wife, when she heard us talking about trash. This is the note my wife left me to make sure that they know.
I'll find out.
There's stuff still in the bottom.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Really,
Well, so you got magazines.
All right, sir. Well, the next item has to do with setting the calendar year 2020 water and sewer rates. We do like to try to have that discussion prior to submitting the budget to you so that we know what to provide for in the budget, which will be proposed to you later this month. So as we are getting ready to send you the proposed budget, we want to talk about water and sewer rates, and I'll talk about sewer rates first because that's the toughest one. So we send our sanitary sewer to Kansas City, Missouri for treatment, and their charges in the fiscal year 2019 budget constituted over 80% of the expenditures. So that's largely what our sewer fund spends money on is simply paying the fees for Kansas City to treat our sewage. So we, as those of you who are on the council will recall, back in 2017, we became aware that there was a significant disparity between what was being sent to Kansas City through the master, according to our master magnetic meter, which is commonly called a mag meter, which is at the Bedford pump station, and it was under measuring. We came to realize, and so we did replace that meter. And the effect on measured volumes was very substantial. I have some figures in the memo that was provided to you. The measured average monthly flow just before installation was about 38 million gallons. After installation, it jumped up to about 70. Our latest measurement for the first 7 months of this fiscal year, it's up to 74 million gallons. We can identify a couple of possible causes. The main one being that the measure, it was just vastly under measuring before, and it is measuring properly now. We also have noticed that when we have a high amount of rainfall in the city, that we are seeing numbers that are substantially higher than on other days. And this does indicate that the inflow and infiltration, INI as it's commonly called, it continues to be an issue for us. It's an issue for all sanitary sewer systems. Anybody with a sanitary sewer system makes efforts to try to reduce that because it's wasted money to send stormwater to be treated in a sanitary sewer facility. It should go directly, it should eventually make its way directly into a river through our storm sewer pipe. But it does get in still. We actually lined all of our lines some years back using gaming funds, and we so we really feel very good about our sewer mains and the fact that the INI is not penetrating to any great degree through our mains, but it still gets in through other means. It can get in through building drains that are improperly connected to a sanitary sewer system. That's often an issue, especially in older cities, where that was a much more common thing. Now we watch very carefully against that for new construction. It can get in through private laterals, where it can get in through the joints between private laterals and our sanitary sewer mains. So we still have work to do, I think, to identify the sources here, and we do have some money in next year's proposed budget to do some testing to try to determine areas where we think maybe we might be getting some of that INI. So that might help to explain, for example, the difference between the 69, the 70 million gallons or so that we were seeing in 2018 and the 74 that we're measuring now in the first 7 months of this year. In any event, it's having a big impact on our fees. We budgeted about $5.2 million to send to Kansas City in this year's fiscal year budget. We're now estimating that it will go up to about $6.9 million per the gallons measured. So we will be submitting to you a budget amendment here soon for this fiscal year. Frankly, we're having other issues in this particular fund having to do with, for example, the sinkholes that have developed in Paseo Industrial District, which are a direct result of hydrostatic pressure from the high level of the Missouri River. And we'll have more information for you about that as well. For 2020, we're proposing $6.8 million for that line item. So we are looking at Kansas City this year does not appear, their fees, a jump in their fees is really not the culprit. We've blamed them in the past, but I wanted to let you know that that's not really what seems to be going on this year. But we are now projecting, in the memo I used a figure at the end of the year that we thought rather than having the 25% that we aim for to have in our operating funds as a fund balance, we are looking at about 15.1. I'm now thinking it's going to be even lower than that after news I've had just since this memo was written and submitted to you. We aimed for 19.2% at the end of this year because we had the same issue last year and we didn't want to raise rates to an unseemly amount. But it's going to be less than that 19.2 that we were aiming for sure. By our calculation, when the memo was written, if you wanted to get to that 25% level in 1 year, you would need to raise sewer rates by 43%. We assume that's simply not palatable, and so we considered what measures we could take to offer alternatives. I do think, as last year, the goal would be to get there over a period of years, but with some of the expenses we're seeing, it would take we would be well below our target level for a long, long time, and it might be going the wrong direction for a while. And so I'm recommending somewhat audacious solution, but I do think it's called for now, and that is to use the gaming fund to pay for capital expenses in this fund for a while, for several years, until we get to the point where the fund can be self-sustaining again. In the budget, again, when the memo was written, I was anticipating $475,000 of expenses that were going to be proposed to you for capital expenses in the sewer fund next year. Might even be more than that now. And I would suggest that we accomplish those capital expenses by transferring the money from the gaming fund. That will allow the fund balance to eventually get up to the level that we want it to be, at which time we should, again, make efforts to make sure it's self-sustaining. So we are recommending the same increase as last year, 12%, which is still high, but we will talk about an offsetting measure that we're also recommending in a moment. If we did that again when the memo was written, we anticipated that it would get our fund balance up to 17.3% from the 15.1 that I mentioned before. I'll pause now if you have any questions about sewer rates. Yes, sir.
Is there any chance that the new mag meters are given erroneous readings?
We have talked about trying to get, I mean, it is brand new, so we certainly hope it's working, but calibrating it, it turns out these things are deeply embedded and in the ground, so in other words, it's not easy to pull out and have calibrated. So we right now are making the assumption that it is operating. We can look further at what it would take to make sure, but
That might be the problem.
well, at this time, we believe it's properly measuring. Meters do not typically over-measure. Typically, if a meter is malfunctioning, that means it is measuring less than is going through, not more. But it is something we can look further at exactly what it would take and what it would cost. But it would be expensive just to have that done. And it is a brand-new meter, so.
When that reaches over to Kansas City, Missouri, they don't measure it or anything? They just
No, they use our measurements.
take off.
Should've left an old meter in
Yeah.
there.
I think next year would be a better.
Yeah.
They'd have cost
Burden
us.
of proof. Question on the way we bill sewer. Is it just use, this many gallons used, this much is also assumed to be sewer? So if you use 5,000 gallons in a month, you get billed for 5,000 water and 5,000 sewer? Is that how we're doing it?
Yes. We assume that
Water used goes into the
Yes.
sewer. The reason I ask that is because I've never had a sprinkler system until this year, but a number of my neighbors also have that, and that water is similar to the rainwater infiltration. That's not going into the sewer, and that's most of my water use right now.
what folks can do is get a separate meter from us for that.
Okay.
And then we would know that that meter is for irrigation
Okay.
and that water is not going down the sanitary sewer.
Good.
That's what I'd recommend for folks who are doing a lot of irrigation.
And the city has those meters available. How does that work?
You let us know and we'll work to install it.
Cost?
So the 12% proposed increase, that would cover all operating expenses, 100%.
Yes.
And what about these surcharge fees? Are we still on the good side of the surcharge fees, the bio-auction?
Yes,
fees
we are.
and suspended
I
solids?
don't think that's an issue anymore.
Okay.
You're talking about the pollution surcharge?
Yeah, the pollution, yes.
sir.
My other question, my only fear with this a little bit is this year we got away with Kansas City not raising their rates.
Right.
Next year, we could be looking again at a 15%
Yes, we
increase,
could.
And we're never going to catch this up.
It's,
But that-
that is part of the reason that I'm proposing we handle capital expenditures out of the gaming fund and at least for a while, and then hope that eventually we'll get to a point where Kansas City's rates are leveling off. They, as you may know, are under an EPA consent order. They have an old sewer system which intermingles sanitary and storm sewer. There was a time when that was considered sensible. There was a saying that they used to have The solution to pollution is dilution. And so if you this is something engineers believe. So if you put enough fresh water in with the sanitary water, in the sanitary sewer, it diluted it to a point where it was no longer dangerous. No, everybody knows that's not true now, but that was how it was handled, and not just in Kansas City, but in other places. They are now under an order to fix that system, and they are passing the costs on to their retail customers and also to some degree to wholesale customers, although for some reason not for this year according to our calculations. They don't just write us a letter and say, we're increasing your rates X percent. We have different parts of town that are billed different ways, but we've calculated it, and we've calculated it comes to about 0.8% this year.
Thank you.
So on the capital expenses, I'm okay, from my perspective, even though I'm big on using capital expense or gaming fund for capital expenses
Right.
and operating fund, but in this particular case, I understand your reasoning and your desire to do that. On the actual capital expenses, so the actual expenses that we would use to sort of make the corrections or the fixes to avoid, having so much going into the sewer unnecessarily, like the rainwater. What's the plan for that action? So I don't want to kind of hunt and peck and guess and spend $1 million sort of guessing where the, where the leaks are. Is there a plan to go into that?
So one of the, there is, yes, one of the things that systems do is they have what's called smoke testing, where you actually inject smoke. You isolate an area, you inject smoke. It's not actually smoke. It's sort of theatrical smoke. It's not harmful. But if you inject it into the sanitary sewer system, and then you see where it comes out, because it has to come out somewhere. And if it starts coming out, for example, a roof drain, a building drain, then you know that connection is connected to the
Interesting.
sanitary
Okay.
sewer system, and then you make them fix that.
Okay.
Because we don't allow that. So that's one thing that we have finding other sources such as private, sources from private laterals is, I don't know if we have an answer to how we detect those. That's,
Okay.
yeah, but
I mean,
to
I
the
wanna
degree that
spend-
we're able, we want to to identify as many sources as we can.
Agreed. I guess my only point to that is I'd like to spend time looking at the big ones first, right? And then getting to the smaller ones so that we start saving the money up front as opposed to in year 3 or 4. I don't
But
know
I
if there's
do
a way to
think
do
that,
that.
yes, but although we have identified that, and we have seen a strong correlation in a jump in daily flow, most of it has to do with the measurements that we're getting,
I understand, yeah,
not from INI.
agreed, yeah.
When they were doing the lining and the cameras and all that a couple of years ago on the sewer, weren't they checking the connections to the residential as well, if I remember, or is that not correct?
We did have a program going, but first of all, the WPC fund was running into trouble. Second of all, we
Okay.
were having doubts as to whether we were really.
Catching
Based
anything?
upon, yeah, that's right. Based
Okay.
upon what we were seeing, really making a significant dent with that
Okay.
for the money we were spending.
Do we need to reevaluate our gaming fund spending based on this for the next 3 years?
Well, we can talk about that when I submit you the budget, but
Okay.
the gaming fund is still in pretty good shape.
Okay.
Water rates.
You got what you need?
Yes, sir. If you don't have any, then I'll jump to water.
Oh, yeah, I
Okay.
forgot about water.
Yeah, so,
Good news.
the water.
Yeah, this is the good
yeah,
news.
The water
That's the
fund,
good news.
the water fund situation is different, yeah. We have a very healthy fund balance there. And what we are proposing, as we did last year, was to lower water rates by 5%, which then has the effect on the total average bill of increasing rates by 4.52%, as shown on the, just very, the example that's in the memo. So that would be our recommendation to you. Do you have any questions about water?
I do have a question on water. So you're saying, basically, if we're dropping the water by 5%, the rates, and then upping the sewer by 12%, that's a difference of 7%, but how it plays out on the bills is about 4.25%. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's
Okay.
right.
If our water fund is going to be, it's like at 300% now, and it's going to be expected to be at 2.206,
263.
Right, 263. I don't know, I mean, if we're recommending 5% decrease, is it possible to decrease it even more to offset the sewer rate? since
Well, we
it's-
still have to charge people for water.
We do have to
so,
charge them, but,
Yeah.
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 It's just a question that I had. I'm not saying we have to do that, it's just a question.
At some point, we would tell you that it's gone as low as it could go. I suppose it, it's possibly an option for you.
Okay, I was just curious, so, we've got pretty cheap water rates as it is.
Councilmember Smith? Yes, sir.
So this will be my first time through the budgeting exercise, so excuse the question if it's out of bounds. But since the water fund is so high versus, what we're looking at the sewer fund, is there a possibility of allocating some of that water fund money toward the sewer issue rather than pulling from the gaming fund?
Well, so what I am looking at is, the council knows, as you'll recall, you told us with regard to the water treatment plant project, which we are now getting ready to submit our plans to the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. The design is almost 100% complete, and we're looking at construction beginning either late this calendar year or early next calendar year. That is a $14 million project. We have budgeted, and you directed that we fund that out of the gaming fund rather than funding it completely out of water, which then would have required us, no matter how good our fund balance is, to issue bonds and raise rates. So that's what we've been doing. With the fund balance in water as high as it is, one option that we have and that I may propose to you either this year or next would be to transfer money from the water fund into gaming, so that the gaming fund is paying less, still most of the cost of that project, but perhaps a little bit less. If we did that, essentially, water is shifting to sewer in that manner,
Just moving in a different.
Different. line items,
indirectly,
different-
but yes.
Is that allowed by state statute
Yes.
to do that? Okay.
That's, I had one more question on the ratio here. So did you consider higher water or higher sewer and lower water to try to balance this out? So 15-20% increase on sewer and maybe a 10% drop on water. Like, what other ratios did you consider to?
Well, we didn't look at all. I mean, we're open to your direction.
I was just curious because same proposal as last year.
It is, and that's kind of why we came up with it. But I mean, if you told us, and I'm sorry, I mean, we'd have to go calculate it. But I mean, if you said we
Seeing the
want to
other funds so
reduce,
healthy,
do something different, I think we can manage whatever you say
And,
tonight.
and I wasn't talking
And-
decrease.
and,
mine, it'd be
Right.
up on.
Well,
down the
it's
other,
not a
but-
hard calculation to do. I mean,
Yeah.
we used a $100 bill, so if you have a $100 bill, you can figure out exactly what it means. So,
Because I
Yeah.
really have some reservations with using the gaming fund to cover this. But I mean, we got to do what we got to do because it's behind. But it's just not. It's not preferable. That's it.
So, if I get your nod tonight, then we would, first of all, assume those things in the budget that we're working on, and also provide a public notice. The state law requires that anytime you change sewer rates, you have to have a public hearing. It doesn't do that for water, but what we've done here in our city is go ahead and have a public hearing where we talk about both water and sewer rates. And it's about a 30-day notice period. So, shall we proceed based on we've recommended here in the memo tonight?
Yes.
Okay, I'm seeing nods, so we'll do that. You'll still
Yes.
have the opportunity to vote formally on it, but at least that tells us what to plan on. So, thank you. Did you have any other questions on this topic tonight?
Second.
Aye.